All right, my unpopular takes. Here we go. Political violence. This is one that I've had many disagreements with people on the left over the years. So my take on political violence is very simple. It's the best thing I could come up with. I don't think there are any good answers here, but the least bad answer, in my opinion, is this. Violence is only okay when it comes to imminent self-defense. Any other use of violence is unacceptable and wrong morally and ethically. So, now what does that look like in practice? Because that's what really matters. In theory, it's easy to say what I just said, but what does that look like in practice? Well, it does mean that I'm not in favor of violent riots or, I think property damage is obviously very different from damage to human beings. But generally speaking, I like to avoid any sort of violence unless it's absolutely necessary. So the only time I would use violence is for imminent self-defense. That goes for foreign policy when it comes to wars, and that goes for personally. I would never, attack somebody or go after somebody unless they do something to me first or they come at me first. I even feel that way when it comes to dialogue and discussion. I'm a very, I don't know what a lot of you guys think of me, but I'm very I'll be kind and I'll be open and I'll be good faith and I'll hear you out and everything. Until I feel like you take a shot at me that's a low blow or unfair, then I sort of defend myself and will get irate and can kind of fire back in an aggressive way. But the reason why I've argued with people on the left about this for a long time is very simple. Because when there's a riot, for example, after something happens, I'm against it. If there's some murdering of an unarmed black person from a cop, obviously I condemn that, and we should do police reform immediately to try to prevent this from happening in the future. But if the response to that is to go out and burn down a grocery store that a lot of people in the black community go to, that doesn't make any sense. And that's violence that's sort of unacceptable and not okay. Now, there are two schools of thought on this, though, because different things have worked. So, for example, in South Africa, Mandela was viewed as the reasonable, kind person that the white authorities could work with during apartheid. But then there were people in the streets who were rioting and who were causing trouble. And what happened was it was a good cop, bad cop situation where the white authorities in apartheid South Africa were like, we can't work with these crazy people burning down streets and rioting and doing violence. We can't do it. But we could work with Mandela. And so Mandela was able to go to them and be like, my friends, it's them or it's me. So you want to make a deal? Let's make a deal. But, as Malcolm X said, it's either the ballot or the bullet. You either give us our rights or you got that to deal with. So in that sense, you can't argue that violence wasn't helpful. It absolutely was helpful. It was helpful to have Malcolm X and the hardliners to Martin Luther King Jr. So there is something to be said about good cop, bad cop, about the violence yielding results. But I always felt like, well, if there's a way we can get the same positive results without the violence, I'd obviously prefer that, which leads to the next point, which is there was a giant academic study that came out not too long ago about the civil rights movement, and they found that the reason why the civil rights movement worked is precisely because they were nonviolent. And so what would happen is you have Martin Luther King and these young civil rights activists, and they would march, they'd be in favor of peace, and that was their message. It was very clear that was their message. And then when you had the racist Alabama sheriffs sick their dogs and fire hoses on these peace activists, people looked at that and said, and I'm talking about white America here, the white moderate that MLK has derided correctly in the past. The white moderate looked at that and said, that's not okay. I'm with the activists. I'm with the civil rights people. I'm not with the Alabama sheriffs. What are they doing? Why are they being violent against people who are clearly peaceful and would not hurt a fly? And so what happened is the sentiment of mainstream America flipped. Previously, it had been with the white authorities in the segregated South. That led to the feeling of the white moderate to flip and be completely on the side of the civil rights activists, and that helped lead to eventually getting the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and things of that nature. So in that instance, it was almost a commitment to pacifism and nonviolence that led to the positive change, because you had this very clear example of morally right and morally wrong. It's morally right to advocate for peace, and then even when you're getting dogs sicked on you and fire hoses sicked on you, you're not fighting back. You're just saying, hey, look, this is what we get for advocating for the right thing. It's Jesus's philosophy. Turn the other cheek. You hit this cheek? Okay, hit this one too. Go ahead. So that's an instance of the same, of different tactics working to the same ends. You have the good cop, bad cop, political violence approach in apartheid South Africa, and you have the basically pacifism, violent approach of Martin Luther King and the civil rights activists. Both of those things worked. So given that we seemingly have our choice, I would choose the thing that I feel is morally and ethically superior, which is the nonviolence while also succeeding. But it's hard. It's difficult. And maybe it does, hand in hand with that goes, you got to get your ass kicked to make people feel sympathy for you, so then they side with you. That might be part of the deal. But that's always been my standard. My standard is the only time political violence is okay is imminent self-defense. I'm actually not a pacifist. I don't believe that, you shouldn't defend yourself, but I think basically you should only defend yourself. And I think you could sort of walk that line and still get positive results and still get societal change. It just might take a little more time, a little more dedication, and a little more discipline among the movement. So however we can avoid creating unnecessary victims, that's what we should do. And I don't judge people who disagree with me on this. I don't judge people who want to take a more militant approach. I understand why they would do that. I just think we should always try to avoid becoming the thing that we hate. And the last thing I'd want to do is create people unnecessary harm and be an oppressor while nominally fighting against oppression. You understand what I'm saying? So anyway, that's my take on political violence. Like I said, I always end up arguing with some people on the left in these moments because there are people on the left who look at a riot or something after a police shooting and they're like, I get it, totally fine, go ahead, do it. I think that's a little glib, and I don't fault people for believing that, because if they think that's the only way to get change, okay, then so be it. But I think there are ways to get it where we can be more moral and more ethical. But yes, my standard on political violence, only for imminent self-defense.